Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. That's a terrible start. Good morning. Much better. I'm glad they plied you with lots of coffee before you were subjected to an hour-long talk about cybercrime. Nonetheless, I will endeavor to make this as interesting and entertaining as I possibly can. I'll also make sure I leave some time for questions at the end. So if you've got a burning query or maybe a flaming retort, you can come back to me at the end and we'll make sure that we discuss it. For those of you that haven't come across me before, I do have a standard slide that I like to use to explain my career so far. And it looks a bit like this, which is actually a pretty accurate depiction of what's happened to me in my career. It's presented here, of course, as a linear, straight line flow. But as you'll note from my present hair, that it's more of a circular kind of event. Interestingly, anytime I have a particularly challenging technical research project, I found that growing my hair longer seems to make the technical work easier. It's really bizarre. But now, of course, there are also various community spin-offs of this introduction. Twitter recently undertook some interesting photoshopped versions of me. Big fan of this one from Lord of the Rings. And I really do have to question my style judgment with those sideburns. I was going through a Linux phase, that's all I can say. Regardless, what I basically do day to day is spend about half my time unpicking the cybercriminals' latest creations. I spend my time looking at the latest malware, looking at the latest exploits, buying random stuff off Amazon, and then reverse engineering it for fun. So I am, by all accounts, a massive geek, and I'm proud of it. The other 50% of the time, I focus on a very important piece of work, I think, in security, which is getting out and talking to those outside of the security research community and trying to get across important and interesting security ideas so we can actually change user behaviors. Now, we talked a lot about the most important things to cover in this session today. Security is an unbelievably huge topic today. But I've centered in on one thing that I think is very important. When you go and talk to a lot of security people, when you go talk to your security practitioners in your businesses, you'll time and time again hear this one phrase: our users don't listen to us. I hear it every week in so many different discussions. And granted, there are a group of users that I like to put in the category of can't be helped, that don't listen. But actually, I'd like to argue that point and put forward a little phrase, a little quote that I came up with a couple of months ago. Now, I don't remember exactly where I came up with the quote, but I do remember I was eating a delicious club sandwich at the time. And in this conversation, I was saying, actually, our users, the people that rely on us for advice, they actually hold on to the things that we say for far longer than they should. We have to pry old best practice from their cold, dead fingers. If you walk down the street and you ask a random person what makes a good password, most of them won't say, I don't know. Most of them will tell you exactly what was brilliant best practice advice 7 years ago. They're wonderfully out of date, and they hold on to that idea. 8-character password. Brilliant advice years ago. Today, terrible advice. 14 characters or go home. So we have an interesting challenge with education and making sure that our users are on top of the latest things that cybercriminals are up to. But I went further. And again, I don't remember exactly where it was, but I think it was probably sometime during dessert. And I stated, sometimes we, the security industry, practitioners, can be guilty of the same thing. So I'd like to dedicate this presentation to exploring some of the outdated ideas that our users, and sometimes we as the industry, have. And what I think are some of the most important things we must all go back to our offices and change. That, of course, will be followed by a myriad of great security topics through the day. I know we're going to get into more detail on things like DDoS, but I thought I'd start with this core theme. Hopefully that sounds interesting. Yes? Is anyone bored yet? Okay, good start. All right, I'll ask again in a minute. So, let's talk about the world of cybercrime that we know today. Some of you may live and breathe this every day. Others may be very new to the topic. But let's talk about what cybercriminals kind of commonly do. The majority of cybercrime today, you will have read in various online articles, maybe experienced firsthand, is the result of very professional cybercriminals. It has staggered me over the past few years, the degree to which these guys professionalize. The ready availability for years now of exploit toolkits that make it point-and-click trivial to generate new malicious code and deploy it. I remember seeing the first exploit kit with a graphical user interface that I thought was more sexy than the average security product. I remember seeing the first exploit kit offer technical support. And I remember seeing the first exploit kit get into a pricing battle with a competitive exploit kit, offering cybercriminals a discount if they would change over to their exploit platform in the next couple of weeks. We are, by all definitions, dealing with an illicit market, an economy, okay? The most stunning one to me in 2015 was one of the exploit kits, Neutrino, actually moved to starting to offer a cloud service. And they would price out for around $400 a month, a service which you could log straight into. And the thing I really loved is they offered a money-back guarantee if law enforcement took your illegal hacking server down. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about, the cybercriminals' prospects of pursuing their consumer rights with a cybercriminal, somewhere the other side of the world. But it's an interesting indication of the dynamics of this market. We've seen lots of different actors, from the script kiddie to the mainstream cybercriminal to the more politically motivated or even nation state, starting to share a lot of the same technical tactics. There isn't the basic and advanced technical tool set that we saw a couple of years before. So this has all been happening for some time. It's not new. Most of it has been reliant on the fresh supply of exploits, focusing on attacking the web browser by majority. The thing that surprised me early this year was less their technical capabilities, but more the sheer creativity that cybercriminals have when it comes to profiting from our information. They are ingenious. For a news program in the UK, I was asked to go and investigate where cybercriminals sell data. And I've hung around in a few of those forums before, but it was a great opportunity to dedicate some time with a couple of journalists to really digging into this. I've been professionally ripping apart malicious code for the last 11 years, and I won't even get into what happened before that. And what I found genuinely and truly shocked me. This is one of the many services that we ran into. AlphaBay. I love this one for the astonishing professional shop that they operate. This is a service that you have to find online. It's on the Tor network. Of course, if you're a journalist, you can't call it the Tor network. It has to be called the dark web. You also have to say it like that, otherwise it's insufficiently awesome. The dark web. So it's basically on the internet, and once in a while the address changes, so you've got to go find the latest address. It's not too difficult. They have nice FAQ articles online covering how to find them. When you get there, you create an account, and you deposit a number of bitcoins. You also submit a GPG key, because the ability to verify your identity in the cybercriminal community, albeit anonymous, is very important. Cybercriminals take their security seriously. So what can you do here? Well, we have the credit card auto shop you can see on the screen. Bit of an American term. If you haven't come across it, the basic idea is it's an automatic shop where you can buy stolen credit cards. Brilliant. Now look at this interface here. What we've got is a listing of country. I filtered it down to the UK, because that's where I was working with the journalists at the time. But there are credit cards from all over the world. You have the user's name, the city, the state, and here we have the postcode or the zip code. I redacted those because several of them actually kind of go down to about 3 or 4 houses. So it was getting a little too personally identifiable to use in a public presentation. We actually bought 10 of these credit cards, and the journalist was able to get hold of 8 out of the 10 individuals who confirmed the credit card details were authentic. They had been stolen. Now, when you go through and select a few of these credit cards, there's a few things to take note of. Firstly, the price. The cybercriminals adjust the price depending on how many people have purchased the credit card so far. So a kind of stock market for data. And after a couple of days, they automatically remove it from the store because, again, they care about the quality of their product. You know, they don't want to get a reputation for selling dodgy credit cards that don't actually let them steal money. When you select them and buy, they in real time, a few seconds later, send you an email which contains a GPG encrypted Excel file with the name, address, date of birth, credit card number, and CVE of the people you purchased. I wish we could get actual retailers to have that level of security and automation as we do from these cybercriminals. It's pretty impressive stuff. Now, credit cards are the obvious fraud case. I mean, we all know you can make money from credit cards. But some of the other things on sale here are really interesting. They've got an area that contains email accounts. So you can buy for between 25 cents in Bitcoin equivalent, up to $3, access to stolen email accounts. Some of them are very interesting people, others fairly arbitrary. Their goal is to just sell it at high speed on volume. What was really stunning to me was how many AOL accounts were in there. I didn't even know AOL was still a company. You remember America Online? I used to get CDs when I was a kid through the post and like use them to make castles and like, was that just me? Like I always had an AOL coffee mug coaster. You know, there's like a million of the things. I remember there was an online article about 200 creative things you could do with AOL CDs. So anyway, showing my age. The other area in here that was really interesting was credentials. They were selling access to companies. So they'd say, RDP credentials, admin or user level, in healthcare or in finance, in this rough geography. And people could tender or barter to buy access to that network. You know, buyer beware, the risk is on you that you find interesting data. all they're doing is shopping out the credentials. So what this should tell us is that cybercriminals are capable of making money from the most seemingly innocuous data. They'll profit from the arbitrary email account of an uninteresting target, and they'll sell it to people who will take the time to go through and try and find interesting approaches to profit. There is no one's paying attention to me, I'm not interesting. We're all the subject of opportunistic attacks that could at any moment become targeted attacks when someone of interest gains access to those credentials. All right, so that's all thoroughly depressing. Let's double back to an interesting issue of user expectations. I mentioned the password issue earlier, right? Let's talk about spam and phishing. Spam and phishing isn't sexy, right? It's not the latest uber clever hack. But it works, and it is the source of an astounding, if not the majority, of data breaches. So you go to the average user, and you ask them, what does a spam look like? And they will invariably point to something like this. You may recognize the general format, maybe the Nigerian banker that wants to give you $50 billion for some reason, or alike. These wonderful stereotypes. This one is one of my favorite spams ever. I have a few weird hobbies, and one of my weird hobbies is I collect spam messages, which I appreciate is only slightly less cool than stamp collecting, but I'm okay with it. Sometimes I actually reply to the cybercriminals, and once in a while, from a non-spoofed address, you actually get a bit of a conversation going. My weirdest one to date was having a 17-email-long thread with a cybercriminal about the potential purchase of a zebra. It's a more minority cybercrime exchange, but he was very interested to take my credit card details for this zebra. Anyway, this one I love. I want to read 2 sections of this. So you're a user, okay? Before we go any further, let me just do this. So you're all watching a security presentation, so you're all innately in security cynic mode. And anything I show you'll go, I wouldn't do that, by default. How many of you would say you're quite technical, you're good with a computer? A few of you? Yes? Excellent. So those of you in that category, you'll be familiar with the phenomenon where you go to a dinner party, to a friend's house, someone asks you what you do, and as soon as you mention computers, they ask you to fix their printer. Like every time. Or, can you fix my iPhone? Or how do I update this? Right? It's not just me. You're like, oh yeah, no, I actually, I'm an exploit developer and a computer security researcher. It's like, cool, I bought this HP printer. Okay, so I want you to imagine you are those people, okay? Imagine you're those people. So when you receive an email that says, if you are a time traveler or alien disguised as human and or have the technology to travel physically through time, I need your help. Obviously you are thinking, seems legit. The sign-off though, absolute winner here. Please do not reply if you're an evil alien. Well, okay. Clearly this is a person I need to be doing business with. These are the ridiculous examples of messages that people think about. And granted, there are many of them. But these don't represent the latest and greatest works of cybercriminals. Through about halfway through 2015, I noticed an interesting trend. I found an alarmingly large number of scams which didn't have the telltale bad grammar, bad spelling, bad images and links, and actually really were quite convincing. I went through an exercise of taking a lot of the ham, the legitimate emails from banks in the UK, and a lot of the spam messages. And I can tell you absolutely, if you took the average security policy that says, look for these things, you would choose the scams as the legitimate emails. there were often more grammar mistakes in the real emails from the banks. So again, we have this gap between user expectations, our security policies, and what's happening in the real world. So I wanted to test this. So we wrote a tool. It's a tool you guys are welcome to use it. It was a really simple tool designed to track social engineering campaigns. And then we took a bunch of these scams and we sent them out to a few thousand users at a couple of willing companies. And we did this over an extended period of time. We sent them versions that were stereotypically bad, and we sent them versions that had more of the traits we see from more convincing modern scams. Let me take you through, out of a few thousand users, the number of clicks we achieved for each of these scams. First off, the tax refund. 8 people clicking on the perfectly constructed version. No one falling for the slightly dodgy-looking one that we would have expected historically. So that was obviously disappointing. Luckily, followed up by, here is my resume. An absolute classic, very effective. In fact, don't put any text into the email, just put the document. And people open it out of curiosity. 217 people with correct grammar, 194 with our kind of nastier example. An Amazon package. This is a good one. How many of you use Amazon? Yes? So you'll be familiar with the standard Amazon problem where you order something and 3 days later it arrives and you're like, oh yes, I forgot about ordering this. Does that happen to you? Yes, I see a few of you nodding. Happens to me all the time. I receive a package, I open it, and it's like Christmas. It's like I bought myself a gift. Now, this is interesting. The correctly constructed one, 116 people, because of course it's plausible you bought something from Amazon and forgot. 7 people falling for the more obvious one with bad mistakes. A payment advice. Invoices, remittances, these are by far the market leader of making people do dumb things. 304 with correct grammar, 87 with egregious mistakes. And yes, just to prove that there are a category of people that cannot be helped, one email with the subject line, "Bruh, do you even click my links?" followed by just the link with no contents. And 19 people decided to click it. Great. So what do we learn from this? Well, I learned a few things. First off, no one believes they're getting a tax refund ever. It doesn't matter how authentic it looks, we just don't believe we're getting tax refunds anymore. So those campaigns are proving to be less effective. Next, people expect bad grammar in resumes and CVs. That's normal, not a huge alarm. People are actually better tuned at picking up hijacks of commercial organizations. If you try and steal the identity of a bank or a shipping company, and you make obvious mistakes, actually people are fairly wise to that. We also learned that people like money. I suppose that probably wouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people, but people are very optimistic when it comes to scams involving potential payments. And lastly, some people just can't be helped. I searched the internet desperately looking for an image that would describe this, and this was my favorite. The third-party facepalm. For when there is so much fail, you need that extra bit of outside help. I feel like this could be used in so many security presentations in so many ways. All right, so you get the idea. We have a gap between what the average cybercriminal is now doing and what our users expect. I want to dive into a few of these scenarios in a little more depth and explore how cybercriminals are excellent at convincing us to do things we shouldn't. Before I do that, is anyone now bored? Still good? Am I going hideously fast? No? Okay, good. All right. So, let's just jump over here. I've got a couple of virtual machines here. I've got a nice Windows system, my innocent victim. I have covered the desktop in lots of icons so that you'll feel perfectly at home. It's actually a legitimate security strategy because, you know, most cybercriminals, when they take over your desktop, will look at it and go, I can't be bothered. It's too hard, can't find the confidential data. Unless, of course, you label it confidential, which is always helpful. Anyway, these are really interesting. These are documents that were attached to a few of these scams that I've talked about, okay? Now, when you open these documents, they either rely on exploits or asking the user nicely to install the malware. There's a relatively even divide between the two techniques. We'll go through it in a little more depth in just a moment. But let's look at these scenarios. First, we have the classic. And the classic is a document that has the Microsoft logo in it. Well, I mean, it obviously must be trustworthy. They've got a table, which they've, color schemed similar to the Office user interface. Must be fine. And it says, this document was created with a newer version of Office. Macros must be enabled to display the contents of the document. So there's a little screenshot, and you can see up here the Enable Content button that I need to click. As soon as we click that, we voluntarily deploy malicious code to our system, which we'll do in a minute. It's always good fun. So this is the stereotype example. It's been around the last year. It's been incredibly successful, including in some of the campaigns that were mentioned in my precursor. Let's look at another one. Localization, big trend. It's not all kind of English scams here. We're seeing a massive trend towards targeting with appropriate use of local language and even local topics of interest. These decoy documents are really quite convincing. This one here goes to quite a lot of effort to try and snare the user into getting access to the information. But this is where things get really fun. I love this one. Here we go. This is a document that poses as an official document from a government/political organization. And what I love about it is how hard the cybercriminals have worked to provide users with instructions on how to disable their security. If you scroll down, it says, if you have, Excel 2000 to 2003, here is what you need to do to go and manually run the malicious code. Great. Scroll down a bit more. You've got 2007. No problem. Just click this, and then go over here, and you can disable the security policy of your organization by selecting this checkbox. It's brilliant. It's using their interest in the document, the fact it's not working. It's using security controls themselves to convince people to go and disable security. It's brilliant social engineering, and it's incredibly effective. But my absolute favorite, I love this one. I mean, it's obviously terrible, but it's clever, is this. How mean is this? It's a document that professes to contain encrypted data. And this particular document has RSA encryption. It's got the RSA logo. It's got a UPS logo. I'm not really sure why. I guess they just thought more logos are better. When you actually open this up, the average user reaction is one thing. Encrypted data, that's important. Well, if it's encrypted, it must be worth reading. So obviously, I'm going to click the Enable Content button so that I can see the contents underneath. Sad reality, I think there are quite a lot of people in the IT profession that could, in a weak moment, fall victim to this. And certainly if you have a shot of tequila, you could definitely fall victim to this. Bad life decision since whenever it was invented. Anyway, so these are the kinds of things that we are dealing with. Now these are the macro-based examples. Let's have a look at an exploit and the kinds of things that an attacker can do. So here we go. Let me just change this virtual machine over. I've also got an attacker's system here. Now, this particular exploit is actually reasonably old. It's from 2014. But it is actually still incredibly successful here and now at compromising people's systems. It's a really fascinating exploit for quite a few reasons. Anyone here who's like super nerdy like me and wants to go through the details of the ROP chain and the really clever bypass of Microsoft's address space layout randomization through use of mscomctl.ocx, see me later, because otherwise there will be nosebleeds aplenty in the crowd. But what is interesting about this is how it came into circulation in the wild. A file turned up in a site called VirusTotal, and this file was sent round to lots of different security vendors, and we all started detecting it. When you opened this document, without any user interaction, it would launch the exploit code. And the exploit code was something I have never seen in my security career. When you opened the document, it would open a male dating site, and it would then delete all of the files on your computer and any attached on the network. No backdoor, no theft of data, no payoff for the attacker, wanton, random damage, which is different. It's unusual. This is a very hard to craft exploit. So I suspect the person who produced it did it for fun, did it for interest, and circulated it to kind of show that it was possible. Hours later, cybercriminals start using it in the APT space. Within a week, it's in common exploit tools. And what's interesting is, this readily available exploit tool, used by a lot of penetration testers, literally uses the source code, the original file of that exploit, and they just patch out the bit with the male dating site and the deleting, and replace it with a more serious payload. So let's go over here and have a look at my Windows document. Now, what you can see here is a file called We've Got Your Kids. This is a really brutal campaign. It's been around for years. It's one of the first campaigns I ever saw in the labs. And we keep seeing different versions of it. The original version, you'd get an email, and it had an attachment, a zip file. And it said, "We've got your kids. We kidnapped them on the way to school this morning. Open the attached zip file to see a photo of them to know we're not making it up." So immediately, my first thought is, shit, I've got kids. Now, for those of you who aren't in the same position, you actually have children. Of course, your default reaction is probably, this is probably a scam, but it tugs on the heartstrings, doesn't it? Just in the right way to make us feel uncomfortable. And what's the harm in just opening that to have a look? Now, one of the original versions, when you open the zip file, it was actually a picture of a gorilla, which, of course, in the case of some people's kids, is fairly accurate. This more modern version here doesn't have so much of a decoy. It's just a Word document. So let's open this document up. I'm going to switch over to my attacker's system. And what you'll notice is Microsoft Word basically just hangs there, right? It crashes. Now, this, of course, won't be particularly alarming to any user, as this happens about 15 times a day on average. Deploy the standard IT fix, I'm going to make coffee. Come back, if it's still doing it, turn it off, turn it on. I mean, we all know these practices, right? So this kind of sits here and hangs. What's interesting is if we switch over to our attacker's system, we now have a backdoor active. So we're now in a position where we're able to completely access and control this system. So let's have a look at some of the fun stuff that we can do. We can list the files. This, of course, can happen from the other side of the internet, not just two machines next to each other. You can see the We've Got Your Kids.rtf document there. We can navigate around the file system. So any data that you have access to as a user, the attacker now has access to. They can modify as they see fit. We could try this. Try taking a screenshot. That might work nicely. Let's go grab that. Always fun. So the attacker can see, what you're up to on your screen, which is quite fun. That's really quite confusing, isn't it? So the attacker can see everything you're up to. One of my absolute favorites, and I love this, there was a penetration test report once. It's always a good penetration test when in the findings report you can include a photo up the CEO's nostrils. Right, that's always a demonstration of success. So I've got a webcam built into the system here. Let's see if we can get it to work. Oh, that's really dark. It's because of bright lights. Oh, let's be more ambitious. Let's do this. Stream-I1. Maybe that'll work. Let's try a live video feed instead. Oh, that's really awesome, isn't it? So that's basically incredibly creepy. You open a document, and any generalized backdoor, any malware today includes these kinds of capabilities to access the microphone, to access the camera, anything like this. We've even done the same thing with Android devices, which was really good fun, because we gave it to a journalist, and the newsroom signed off and gave us permission to do it, and they didn't know. And we tracked them for 2 days and built this amazing, creepy wall with a map of where they'd been, with recordings of calls, and my favorite, because phones have 2 cameras, one on the front and one on the back, a large number of photos of the inside of their ear. Nothing is more creepy than that. Anyway, you get the idea. The point is, these things provide us, as attackers, with a very deep compromise of an organization. And from there, we can obviously spin off in different directions, trying to pivot to other systems, trying to move around the network. Okay, anyone bored now? Still good? Okay, we're nearly there. You've nearly survived. Now, you might be looking at this chart here and thinking, his slides are really old. But this is, within a couple of weeks, an accurate breakdown of a lot of the exploits that are used in these document-based malware examples successfully. So it is absolutely true that exploits from 2012 are still proving effective. Why? It's another issue of user expectations. We've got to many of our users the idea the browser, Flash, Java, etc., scary and dangerous. But their office software they use day to day doesn't really factor into the same consideration. Now, I've talked a lot about mainstream cybercrime, documents, traditional computers. These are still very much the mainstay focus of cybercriminals. But it would be remiss of me not to at least mention some of the new devices that we have joining our networks at home and at work. So I've got to talk about the Internet of Things, right? It's the security topic of the moment. But let me add a caveat. A lot of people talking about the Internet of Things are throwing their hands in the air, screaming about how terrible it is, without commenting that so far, cybercriminals really haven't been that interested. Before I go into why and what I think we actually need to be concerned with, let me give you a few examples of the kinds of flaws we found in some recent research projects. I bought £5,000 worth of Internet of Things devices. Some of them, CCTV cameras, baby monitors. Some of them were very sensible. Others, I have no idea why anyone would want them. One of my favorites, the wireless remote plant watering device, for when you're away on holiday, sensible, which has a robot hand you can use to move the plant, because plants like that, apparently. I don't know. It was really weird. Great vulnerability in it, though. You could make it water forever, just continuously. So anyway, we took all these devices, we analyzed them, and we found a myriad of really quite scary flaws. But what astonished me the most was when we went to the internet, used tools like Shodan, and ran a quick search to see how many of these devices were punching holes through the network they were connected to out to the web. Without trying particularly hard or being particularly offensive, we found just over 570,000 CCTV cameras alone. Here's one from a school in the United States, which had no username and password. None. It comes with a default of admin and password. You've got to really work hard to be that bad at security. It takes effort. You've got to commit. We obviously waited for the kids to leave. This one is an eternal favorite of mine. This is a petrol station in, I believe, Malaysia. What you can see here is the payment card terminals. This is a HD feed, by the way. It's intentionally degraded. You can absolutely see the credit card number and the PIN, and it is streaming out to the internet. Here you can see the PIN code to unlock the till. Here we have an excellent view of the chocolate supplies, so you can time your robbery perfectly. And it's just streaming out to the web with no username and password. The fact that a device allows you to have no username and password and connect to the internet, I believe to be an act of sheer negligence. Imagine a Microsoft allowing you to do something like that in this day and age. They'd be dragged through the press backwards. But I think the big question we're all wondering is, what on earth is she eating? It just looks horrible, doesn't it? I want to show you one more example, just because, it's fun. This, and this is not going to be something you'll hear very often in your life, is my favorite hacked CCTV feed ever, because it features a CCTV feed of a security guard watching the CCTV feed. And it's just satisfyingly meta. Now, I watched him for about 57 minutes. I was sat at the time in a meeting, and our CMO turns across to me. He's like, "What is wrong with you?" Just watching this feed of this guy watch the CCTV, chuckling to myself. Because at minute 40, if you look closely down here, you will see he actually falls asleep. He was asleep for about 17 minutes. I clipped the video because, no one wants to see 17 minutes of a guy sleeping on CCTV. But if you do, I have the footage. My point is, these devices are ending up in an astounding number of networks, an astounding number of places. But many IT people and many users treat them as black box devices. They don't recognize them as the computers they are. Why haven't cybercriminals paid more attention to them? I believe the main reason is not due to a lack of exploitability. Many of these flaws take me back to my childhood, the easy days of hacking compared to modern computers. I believe it's because they have yet to contain the personal or financial information that makes them interesting. But look at the pace of innovation in this space. Look at the hockey stick of adoption and creativity. 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, who knows? The killer application comes along that sees your users put them in your environment, or perhaps even you yourselves will produce some of these devices that make criminals interested. The gap between user trust and the deserved level of trust and respect of security is great. So should you be terrified of the Internet of Things now? No. But shouldn't we learn these lessons whilst these things are still toys before they're truly baked into the infrastructure of our homes and our companies? Now, I have a follow-on from this. It's kind of my last little wrap-up point here, which is all about mobile devices. Of course, I've talked about the Internet of Things. We've got to talk about mobiles. And I recently conducted a research project into that degree of user trust. Why? Because I've had too many conversations like this. I've seen people literally take something suspicious from their computer and open it on their phone. What a brilliant idea. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? There's a high level of consumer trust of these devices. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're using an iPhone, your chances of infection with malicious code are tiny compared to the average computer. Of course they are. But is that trust truly deserved? Here's an interesting example of an application. Many of you may not have heard of this. Happened a couple of weeks ago. This is an application called Happy Day English. It was uncovered by some Palo Alto researchers. And this Happy Day English app is in Apple's App Store. So, of course, it's totally safe. When you open this app anywhere in the world, outside of China, it shows you a list of English to Chinese phrases. When you open it in China, it contains an app store. So we've got an app store in an app in Apple's App Store, which is, again, wonderfully meta. This app store on non-jailbroken phones, any given normal iPhone, enabled the user to install non-Apple approved applications, pirated applications, potentially anything else. And it operated there for an extended period of time without them noticing. Now, I didn't see anything nasty and malicious, no malware, being distributed through these channels. But what the author of this tool has done is absolutely demonstrated the level of check of applications is very thin. But the corporate and user expectation of that is incredibly high. So I'm not saying you should run out and scream and burn all your iPhones. No, voice of reason. We do as security professionals, as risk managers, need to stay on the pulse of truly how secure that ecosystem is. To give you a sampling of this, I took 1,002 applications. 1,002 because, 1,002 is always better than 1,000. And went through looking at simple security traits like the ability to make secure connections. One stat that summarizes it well, 306 of them attempted to make secure connections, but did so in such a way that any attacker could intercept the connection and modify the data. I found an app which contained the Twitter secret API key of the company in question being distributed to all of its users. So at any time, anyone could take over their Twitter feed. Plain text credentials, use of outdated authentication mechanisms. My point is this. Our users have a very high level of trust of these platforms. But when you go digging, even with some rudimentary checks, these new devices, these mobile applications, are incredibly fragile and in many ways comparable to what we saw in the mainstream computing space 10 years ago. Should you not use them? Of course you should use them. But we must conduct thorough, meaningful risk assessments, not buying into the marketing hype of organizations that would have us believe it's a non-issue. That's me wrapping up for time here. You'll hear a lot through the rest of the day about what you can do about these issues. If you do have questions other than the brief period of time we have now, feel free to ping me a note on Twitter or on email. I'll be happy to reply. And of course, I look forward to chatting with many of you throughout the rest of the day. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate you listening to me for so long. Enjoy the rest of the day.
James, this has been horrifying. Just about the right kick in the morning to make us all being aware of the rest of the day, what we're going to talk about. But I do have a question. You were talking about phones. Do you think this is like the one area that we should expect it's going to be like the threat of the future? What would you consider being like the topic of the future, rather than you showed us a lot what's still going on these days, but you're always a little bit ahead of the game. So what do you think consider the biggest threat?
Well, I think that cybercriminals have proven, if nothing else, that they are experts in going after where the interesting data is. I mean, the majority of cybercriminals are interested in making money. That's 99%. And the small number who are politically motivated and are usually after similar data. At the moment, traditional computers, the servers in our environments, the places where we put this data, are their focus, but we are increasingly putting all that valuable data onto these. I mean, in many cases, these are actually becoming more sensitive. You know, I go here to do two-factor authentication to unlock the services that contains the really good stuff. So I think that we have to recognize the low interest, comparatively, from cybercriminals in mobile and Internet of Things is not a function of their wonderful levels of security. It's a function of the fact that the data they want is still so available in traditional environments, and I do believe over the coming years that will change. So I think we all have to focus on Internet of Things devices and mobile and improving the resilience of that ecosystem before it becomes of interest. Otherwise, it's going to be back to the days of Windows 95, and those of us that remember that won't be keen to go back there.
Fair enough. James, why is it that we are still so ignorant about security issues?
Well, I think there's a couple of challenges. Firstly, security best practice does actually change quite frequently. Things like password length, what you should and shouldn't click on, and getting it out to users in an engaging way is actually difficult. I go to so many companies that have had a breach, and we go through their security awareness policies, and it's 400 pages of document written in legalese that is so boring it makes my eyes bleed. And I love this stuff. We have to find more engaging approaches to getting out to our users, to getting the message across. And as a security community, where we've excelled at technical research, coming up with defenses, I think traditionally we've been horrible communicators with the outside world. So I think it's all about us as security professionals learning how to integrate better with our businesses, how to communicate to the public. And I think a large part of this is endemic to society. We have to be getting this stuff into schools earlier, younger, so that it's a foregone conclusion by the time these people are employees.
Last question. What do you think about the Apple versus FBI controversy?
It's a wonderful debate. So we could spend an hour on it, and we could go through lots of different examples, but very quickly, I believe, of course, that law enforcement being able to pursue terrorists, people that would want to do us harm, is an incredibly important thing. That being said, my first love is cryptography. I've spent a lot of my life dedicated to it. We have to recognize that so much of our modern world, so much of our professional, our personal lives, stands on the shoulders of strong encryption. And a failure in some of those core crypto systems could be catastrophic to us in so many ways, economic, privacy, you name it. So I believe that the weakening of that fundamental protective technology in our society in any way is abhorrently the wrong thing to do. So I think those parties need to get around a table, they need to find an approach, but backdooring encryption is wrong, period. Thank you. I said that at a law enforcement conference the other day and I got booed by a guy. I was like, oh, come on. But it is my genuine opinion. And the one positive thing I will say to both sides, isn't it great that we are having this debate in the public now where it's not being decided in a dark room or a casually thrown dart, where we have the opportunity to decide the right balance of freedom to, freedom from. So I don't know where we're going to end up, but I'm glad that the discussion is occurring.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to having you here with us today, this morning. Take the opportunity, catch him in the break. James Lyne.
Thank you, everyone.